Time for sound design. Today's video is about LA synthesis or linear arithmetic synthesis, a type of synthesis that was invented in 1987 by Roland, and they released the Roland D50 synthesizer in the same year. And the basic idea of this type of synthesis is to combine a sample for the first portion of the sound, the attack of the sound, together with subtractive synthesis in order to create more interesting, different, and for the time at least, more futuristic sounds. In 1987, when memory was very expensive, they used very short samples to only create the beginning of the sound from a sample. So that could be a sample of an acoustic instrument or an object, and then the rest of the sound would be a subtractive synthesis sound. Of course, now we don't have the limitation of memory anymore, but I was thinking that it is an interesting way of generating sounds. My goal is to use the concept of LA synthesis and create a few patches of my own in Ableton. So what I did is I sampled a few acoustic instruments and layered them with the Drift synthesizer in Ableton. So I'll first show you 3 examples that I created already, and then we'll go into the sound design process and record something and create a patch from scratch, and I'll show you all the steps for creating your own LA synthesis patch in Ableton. So let's get started with the first LA synthesis example. So for the first sound, I sampled this glass bottle that I hit with a drumstick, which sounds like this. So it's a very sharp, short sound, and you can see that here on channel 1 in Ableton. Then I put that into a sampler and I layered it with a patch that I created in the Drift synthesizer, and it sounds like this. So as you can hear, you hear the glass bottle, and then that's only the beginning of the sound, and the rest is a synthesizer. For example number 2, I used the Kalimba. I sampled one note from the Kalimba, and it sounds like this. That's a very short, plucky sound. And then layered with 2 instances of the Drift synthesizer, one acting as the main sound and one is a sub sign 2 octaves below. And this is how it sounds. And then the third example, I used this cowbell and again used the drumstick to hit it like that. And again layered with the Drift synthesizer, and it sounds like this. So there's some overdrive on the actual synthesizer. So these are 3 examples of combining an acoustic instrument or an object together with a synthesizer. Let's now create something from scratch, and I can show you all the different steps of how to do this in Ableton. So for this example, I'm gonna use this children's Glockenspiel. As you can see, it's a very basic instrument. So I'm gonna put it here on the desk. I have the Rode NTG4 shotgun mic pointing at it. I'm gonna use this little wooden beater, and I'm gonna sample the highest C that's in this 2.5 octave, 2 octave keyboard. So let's do that. So this is the note that I sampled. Sounds like that notification ping on the iPhone. And then here on this MIDI track, I have a sampler loaded up. So I'm gonna load the sample into sampler. Go to the release, 50 milliseconds, that's okay. And I change the start and end points. So we're right at the start of this sample. And it is a C, so it should work. So now that we have this sample in simpler, we can play this on the keyboard. But we want to layer this with a synthesizer, so we're going to use the instrument rack to do this. So if we just select the simpler and do Control G or Command G, you group it into an instrument rack. And here on the bottom left, the bottom icon, if you open that, you open this window, and now you can drop more instruments and layer basically within an instrument rack. So if we go to Instruments and to Drift, this is the sampler. And now we have drift. And now by playing one note, you play both instruments. So it's... So now let's design a sound for the drift. And I'm thinking to use square waves for both oscillators. And then the first one, we have the shape knob, so we can maybe put it like this. The synth layer is way too present, so we want to tone it down a bit. Maybe put it at 750, crank up the resonance a bit. So now we have the sample of the Glockenspiel and we have the drift synthesizer, and it sounds like this. And of course we can tweak it more. We can add effects for the different sampler and the drift. So for instance, what we can do is to put a redux on only the sample to make it 12-bit. Lower the sample rate as well, but not on the synthesizer. And we can also change the volume to make, for instance, the Glockenspiel a little bit softer in volume compared to the drift. So one thing I want to do is change the attack of the synth. So it comes in a bit later, and the release as well. Basically to make room for the sample. Okay, that's too much. And now in order to have an effect that is working on both of these two layers, I'm gonna group this instrument rack again. So it will be a rack in a rack, as you can see here. And now we can add, for instance, a chorus on top of this. So the chorus will be for both layers. And this is important because we want to save this as an instrument and add it to our library. So we want to have the effect included. So yeah, the next thing I would do is save this and add it to my library of instruments. Maybe tweak some of the settings a bit more, but for now I think the sound is quite okay. So yeah, this was a very quick introduction to LA synthesis, and learning from these old methods of synthesis is really interesting because you can still apply it in Ableton. And of course you don't have to, there's no limitation in memory. You can use samples that are much higher resolution and also longer if you want. But the idea of using a sample for the attack portion of a sound and then continuing with a synthesized sound, I think is very interesting. And it makes you really think about what you want to use as an attack sound, because you can use an instrument like a kalimba, but you can also just use an object like an empty glass bottle. So there's a lot of different possibilities. You can have a more percussive sound, you can use your voice. There's tons of different options. And so once you start recording this and experimenting with this, there's all kinds of ideas that come to mind. One more thing is that now I use one sample and one synthesizer, but like in the original D50 from Roland, you can actually have multiple samples and multiple synthesizer layers, or what they call partials. So of course, same here, I can add another synth, and it doesn't have to be an analog style synth. I can use operator like an FM synth, or I can use a wavetable synth to even layer up more elements, either samples or synthesis engines, to create even more complex and different kind of sounds. Hopefully this was inspiring. Let me know what kind of patches you have created. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments as well, and see you in the next one.